Welcome to Exceeding Your Benchmark, a podcast brought to you by Benchmark Products. Tune in as we explore life science industry-relevant topics, discuss industry-leading practices, and dive into cutting-edge solutions the industry has to offer. This is the Exceeding Your Benchmark podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Exceeding Your Benchmark podcast brought to you by Benchmark Products. I'm your host, Michelle Dawn Mooney, and today we're talking about redefining contamination control practices in pharmaceutical manufacturing. I am pleased to bring on today's guest. Fred Ayers is the advisor for Sterility Assurance for Global Quality Systems at Eli Lilly. And Fred, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
Looking forward to getting into the conversation. Before we do, can you take a minute or two and give us a brief bio?
Yeah, like you said, my name's Fred Ayers. I was actually born in Indianapolis, live in Raleigh-Durham, North Carolina now. So it's nice and warm down here right now. Nice. I've been in the pharmaceutical industry for 20 plus years, working as a contamination control expert at different levels within the quality organization, the tech service organization, across all different platforms of manufacturing of parenteral products.
Perfect. So clearly we know why you're here for this topic. So let's start off with this. Can you explain the shift towards a more holistic approach to contamination control measures in pharmaceutical manufacturing? And then how does that differ from previous practices?
Yeah, the biggest driver for the change to a more holistic approach is actually driven from the approval of EU Annex 1 in August of last year. That was a long kind of gestation of a process. That started in essentially 2015 with a published article, and then the Annex revision was made, the first revision, for feedback from the industry. There's lots and lots of feedback from the industry. And like I said, it got approved last year, but one of the key aspects of that approval of that revised Annex was the contamination control strategy. And that contamination control strategy is expected to be holistic and have all parts of your manufacturing process and the controls that you have in place related to that. And very specifically, the other key piece that came out of that is that Annex 1 is specific for sterile products, but the expectation is that some of those aspects could be utilized for, say, non-sterile or low bioburden products that are manufactured in the pharmaceutical industry. And so, that is why the holistic contamination control strategy is so important related to the manufacturing process, because it allows you to think holistically and how all of those things kind of interact with each other and not just like the end result, or what I like to call as the measure. Right. So one of the biggest measures that people talk about is environmental monitoring, but there's a lot of things that can potentially impact that related to people, facility design, facility process controls, things like that. And so it really allows and kind of instructs the manufacturers to look at that holistically and everything underneath that umbrella. So that's probably the biggest change. And I wouldn't say it's a drastic change from previous practices. It just kind of brings it more to the foresight and really helps those individuals that are, sterility assurance subject matter experts or contamination control experts to really come to the forefront and have a seat at the table with operations and quality assurance and tech service manufacturing individuals to really bring all that together and help really focus on that delivery of contamination control and ensure product quality.
You talk about bringing things together. No doubt there are quite a few variables in the contamination control process. So how does the success of any one element of a contamination control strategy depend on the others? And then how can this interdependence be managed?
Yeah, I think that's why, it's really important to have a cross-functional group. And not have it be kind of siloed, right? It should be cross-functional. So you should have engineering, tech services, quality assurance, quality control involved in creating and understanding that contamination control strategy, because all of those items can interact, from the design of, let's say, a filling equipment or design of a tank, a bioreactor for your process, and understanding how all of those things fit together And so there's a lot of interdependency associated with that from the standpoint of the design, how you qualify and validate that process associated with that design, what kind of measures or what kind of data are you getting off that on a continuous basis, and then how are you interpreting that data and understanding the impact on that data on your process, because the data itself doesn't necessarily mean the product quality is bad. It means it's an evaluation of the process, and then how do you bring that data in to evaluate that. And that's why it's important to have it from a holistic standpoint and have that interdependency managed through a cross-functional team evaluating that data in real time, and then also identifying key process indicators or KPI on an ongoing basis to be able to see over time how is that holistic control strategy really working.
You talk about new information and feedback coming into play that's really prompting some of these changes. So, can you provide an example of an outdated contamination control mindset or practice that should be avoided in modern pharmaceutical manufacturing?
Yeah, that's a good question. So one of the key things in the annex is that it brings up rapid microbial methods or alternative methods. And so if you're building a new facility or upgrading a facility, one of the things that you should really be focused on is, instead of replicating, traditional or older methodologies related to either the manufacturing process or the monitoring process associated with that, how can you bring in new technologies for that? So one of the big um, technologies that people have been talking a lot about is artificial intelligence or machine learning, and how can you bring those into the manufacturing process, where if you are collecting data on your process, let's say every second, right? That is a ton of data that you're building, and how can you make machine learning analyze that data through an algorithm on an ongoing basis to truly identify when you have information or data that shows that your process has changed, giving you that feedback. And so it's really important to think about things like that as you're building in a new facility or a new process, and not really thinking about it from kind of an older, kind of almost archaic style of single data points, because now you're getting data, like I said, maybe even up to every second. But if not every second, usually it's like every 5 to 10 seconds, data is coming in. So you have to be able to, take all of that data and bring it together and have some help analyzing it, because most humans can't look at that much data and really make sense of it. So you need that machine learning to help that out.
You talked about what not to do and what we should kind of be phasing out, but let's talk about what we should be doing. What are some of the best practices for implementing an effective contamination control strategy in pharmaceutical manufacturing?
I would say the biggest thing that you could do is identify a strong governance structure associated with your contamination control strategy, and making sure, to kind of reiterate what I said before, making sure that you have a cross-functional team to understand who is responsible for the different aspects of contamination control and how those interdependencies are there. And like I said, that governance structure will be identifying and evaluating those key process indicators. They'll be identifying um, those items that come up and are issues, and how do you resolve those issues. They'll be looking at things of how do you maintain your qualified state through change management process, through deviation management process, but then also how are you looking at data to continuously improve your process. And continuous improvement is one of the key aspects of the holistic contamination control strategy, that you should never be stagnant, that you're always making that continuous improvement and improving your overall contamination control related to the manufacturing of your products.
How would you say changes in the regulatory environment, such as the recent Annex 1 update that you mentioned, impact the development and implementation of a contamination control strategy?
Yeah, this is a really good question. The key, I think one of the key drivers from a contamination control perspective is the approval of Annex 1. The approval in August of last year really drives point that the contamination control strategy should be in the forefront. It should be cross-functional, it should be holistic, and it should drive continuous improvement for your manufacturing process. And so, that approval really kind of allows the entire holistic approach to your contamination control, right? And like I said, it's about that cross-functionality of having all of the individuals at the table, right? Not just one function, whether it's quality assurance or tech services or operations, but everybody is working together to move forward. And so that is a really key regulatory document that is helping drive the holistic contamination control strategy forward in the manufacturing environment. An additional document that was recently approved, it was a revised document, ICHQ9, which focuses on quality risk management. Quality risk management is a really important foundation to the contamination control strategy. So those two pieces together, recently approved and are out on the kind of in the wild now, really help drive that holistic contamination control perspective for the manufacturing process. And because of that, it really helps understand your manufacturing process. And at the end, it really helps ensure product stability and product safety for the patient.
Hard to believe, but we are almost out of time, Fred. I'm sure people might want more information or maybe have some questions. How can they reach out? Where can you send them to get that info?
Yeah, I think the biggest piece of information you could get is go to the PDA website. The PDA published Technical Report 90 on contamination control strategies. It's a very well-written document. The leads of that group were kind of very special because they were able to herd the cats a little bit. But that document really helps out from a standpoint of laying the groundwork and providing a visualization of what are the contamination control strategy foundational elements, what are the controls, how do you qualify and validate those controls, and then how do you provide the appropriate guidance and related to the monitoring of those controls, and then also there's the continuous feedback through your change management and deviation management system. So that would be the number one source I would recommend you go to. There are other sources out there. PHSS has one, ECA has one, and you can find those online. PHSS is the number 20, and then, like I said, ECA has one as well. And you could really focus on that. And then also just from a Midwestern perspective, since I was born and raised in Indiana, the PDA Midwest does have multiple events that you can look on their website and potentially connect with your colleagues and find that out as well.
Perfect. Fred Ayers, advisor for Sterility Assurance for Global Quality Systems at Eli Lilly. Fred, thank you so much for your time. A great conversation. I'm sure there will be a lot of questions and people will want more information. And you did a great job of giving them a lot of resources there. So really appreciate your time. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
And I want to thank all of you for tuning in and listening to Exceeding Your Benchmark, a podcast brought to you by Benchmark Products. Of course, you can visit benchmarkproducts.com for more information on the company. Be sure to subscribe to this podcast to hear more great conversations like the one you heard today. I'm your host, Michelle Dawn Mooney. Once again, thanks for joining us. We hope to see you again soon.